Good evening, BookTube. There's actually a book which I missed off of my August roundup. It just completely deserted my memory, which is deeply ironic because I've just read it. I've only just finished it in the last day or two, so it's very strange that it would simply vacate the hippocampus in the way that it has. But in any case, the book is Rory Carroll's Comandante, The Life and Legacy of Hugo Chavez, and it is a brilliantly written romp through the life of one of Latin America's most extraordinary and ultimately destructive leaders, and what he did to his native country, which continues even now to suffer from the after effects of his disastrous policies and his deranged drive for what he saw as revolutionary transformation. This is the story of how a country that was the richest in Latin America was seen as the most successful country in Latin America, had an imperfect but relatively successful liberal democratic political system, which had functioning institutions, which had a functioning economy, which had a population that was mostly prosperous, albeit with a significant minority who were very poor and who struggled in their lives. It is the story of how this country got turned upside down and turned into a basket case, into a laughingstock, into a country that now exports a large proportion of its population to other countries as refugees because it cannot feed itself. This is what socialism will do to your country if it gets its tentacles on your country, on your state, on your institutions. Now, before I get carried away and I begin ranting about the evils of socialism, I would like to preface all of this with an admission of my own responsibility in hyping this absurd, destructive megalomaniac. And when I was 13, it was indeed the case that I was a passionate Chavista, or thought I was. I thought I was a socialist. In fact, I took my adoration of Chavez to such an extent that even my rather left-wing English teacher was amused. Needless to say, I have graduated past that point, and I now see how destructive socialism is firsthand. I did actually spend some time in a Marxist organization. So when I say firsthand, I mean that I have personally borne witness to the fact that Marxist ideology is inherently totalitarian, is inherently destructive, is inherently repressive, is by its very nature disdainful of individual freedom, of individual choice, of critical thinking, of debate and discussion, and is totally alien to how a functioning, normal society should operate. So believe me when I say that I have experienced an approximation of what the people of this country of Venezuela have had to endure for the past several years. Of course, it's nothing like the extent of what the people of Venezuela are going through. But nevertheless, I have experienced something like it in microcosm, albeit not to the same extent. So, getting back to the book, Rory Carroll, to give you a quick introduction, was many years ago the Guardian's main Latin American correspondent. And he actually spent several years in Venezuela, living under Chavez's regime, experiencing daily life in a country that was gradually being transformed, gradually being deformed, gradually being destroyed and turned into hell on earth. And he actually experienced firsthand what it was like to live under a demagogue. Hugo Chavez came to power in 1999 on a wave of popular enthusiasm, just months before I was born, actually, becoming president of Venezuela on this wave of revulsion at the old oligarchic establishment that had run that country since the 1950s. And there was massive hope associated with this figure. There was massive enthusiasm for his program of positive social transformation. There was the belief that he would work wonders and that he would end the cronyism, the corruption, the neglect of the poor, the enrichment of the elite in Venezuela, that he would bring justice and equality after all of these years of corruption and misery and economic decline. And he gave the Venezuelan population what all demagogues and dictators give to their populations when they first come to power. He gave them honeyed words. He gave them promises, golden promises of change, of hope, of a better tomorrow. And what did he provide instead? He gave the country hyperinflation. He gave the country food shortages. He gave the country a skyrocketing crime rate. He gave the country a dysfunctional military that he filled with his cronies, the command system of which he completely distorted, to the point that if Venezuela was invaded tomorrow, its military would quite frankly be unable to function. But it's coup-proof. His regime is coup-proof. So, who cares? He succeeded in destroying its institutions. It no longer has a functioning judiciary. It no longer has a functioning health service because he destroyed it with his insane policies. Nothing in the country works anymore. But it must be said that things weren't always this way. In the early years of his presidency, there was change. There was positive change. People did benefit from his regime. People were lifted out of poverty. People were given immense support in terms of subsidized healthcare, subsidized education, subsidized petrol, which cost practically nothing. The country was basking in the world's largest proven oil reserves. And with that money, Chavez was able to fund a program, an ambitious program of positive change that changed the lives of a great many people for the better. But it was built on sand. It was built on an illusion, a belief that the oil money would never run out, a belief that the bonanza, the windfall, would never end, and that the party would continue. And sooner or later, things came grinding to a halt. The oil money was no longer flowing as freely as it was before. The social programs were increasingly unsustainable. The economy, which had been decimated as a result of destructive price controls on everything was increasingly becoming dysfunctional. Uh, a labyrinthine set of currency controls were placed on the economy, which made it practically impossible for ordinary people to get access to foreign currency to buy what they needed. They had to go to the black market in order to get any foreign currency at all. Meanwhile, the regime and the regime's supporters, those who were closest to those who were in power, had privileged access to these dollars that they could use as they saw fit. A new corrupt elite arose, a oligarchy, so called because Chavez named his program of social transformation after his great hero, Venezuela's independence hero, Simon Bolivar. He called it the Bolivarian Revolution. And what we see recounted in this book is the sad story, not new to the lives of Latin Americans, of a left-wing populist. A left-wing populist who promised heaven on earth and actually brought hell on earth. Carroll is a brilliant writer. He writes the story in a way that you could be reading a novel. It's written with a literary skill and with a finesse at narrative, which is much to his credit. You don't get that many journalists who are able to do that, but he is one of the few who succeed. I wouldn't put him in the same league as Christopher Hitchens, but he is certainly a very good writer. If I may give you a sample, this is towards the beginning of the book, and he is recounting a scene in which Chavez is standing in front of the ruins, in front of the remains, I should say, of Simon Bolivar, and he's giving a speech, a fiery pep talk about socialism and independence and sovereignty and anti-imperialism to a crowd of admirers. The Comandante squinted in concentration to remember a poem about the liberator. Squinting turned his eyes into impenetrable slits, the more so now he had put on weight and masked the object of his gaze. He always sought eye contact and would continue scrutinizing his audience left to right to left, a minesweeper of faces, appraising expressions. Mural artists tried to render that look by furrowing the brow and narrowing the eyes. The toy dolls of him had a little lever at the back of the neck to swivel them. When the real Comandante's brown eyes flashed back open, whoever was in his sight line at that moment would jolt. Now, this is very, very fine prose, you must admit, and the rest of the book continues in that vein. We have these wonderful vignettes of everyday life in Venezuela. We have a bunch of interviews that Carroll has done with people who have actually had to live under this regime. Many of them are government officials, some of them are just ordinary people, ordinary supporters of Chavez, some of them are bitter, die-hard opponents of Chavez, some of them are disgruntled former supporters who have now come to realize how horrible the regime was in many ways and what they were complicit in. And this was actually published in 2013, so shortly after Chavez's death. In fact, the book takes us up to his death, up to the moment when he handed the torch to his distinctly uncharismatic successor, who is still the president now, Nicolas Maduro. And it's a rather sad story of how a country with so much promise, how a government with so much promise, destroyed everything by its incompetence. Destroyed everything. And I mean everything. Nothing in that country is functional anymore. And it's a shame that in the 11 years since this book came out, Venezuela has only gone downhill. Things have only gotten worse for the people in that beleaguered country. And it's my hope that someday soon, that evil regime that exerts a stranglehold over the lives of so many millions of people will fall. But it's a matter of when. When will that happen? Will it happen? With the military still remaining so loyal to a regime that is so clearly unable, incapable of actually delivering for the people. I will end things there, but it's a book I highly recommend, now more than ever, when the left are desperately trying to disassociate themselves from the wreckage, from the ruin of a project which they once hailed so uncritically